This episode of The King's Hall is brought to you by Private Family Banking Partners, John Michael Clark at The Family Captain, and our supporters at patreon.com.
Why is it that people today have such difficulty finding friends? Men do not possess the brotherhoods they once had. Women are plagued with the bite of loneliness, and children no longer fill the streets with their laughter. Friendship is something that needs to be recovered and cultivated. The philosopher Cicero and the philosopher Aristotle both shared a Pythagorean philosophy of friendship, which placed such value on friendship that every man should strive to have a friend closer than a brother. Both philosophers reference a famous story from the Greeks to communicate the standards of friendship. Dionysius was a terrible and cruel king. The ruler was feared by both enemies without and subjects within. When tyrants reign, fear abounds, but not just from the tyrant's subjects. The tyrant himself has much to fear, and his fears were justified. He was hated by the people. Paranoia often kept Dionysius awake at night. Often, fitful sleep and vivid dreams would be his companions in the dark of night. It is reported that Dionysius would execute men simply because of dreams of assassinations. One day, Dionysius noticed two men that were unfamiliar to him. When the king inquired about these suspicious men, he was told they were two friends named Damon and Pythias. He was also told that Pythias had made speeches asserting that tyrannical kings should be overthrown. The two friends were full of mirth at the excitement of their travels to Syracuse, and the pleasure of having a close friend as a peer in the sea of the unfamiliar. Dionysius watched the two friends and grew more and more suspicious. Fear feeding the anxieties of the king, he convinced himself that Pythias would attempt to assassinate him and ordered the man's arrest. The king charged Pythias with being an assassin and sentenced him to be executed. The king asked Pythias, "Have you anything to say before you meet death?" "Yes," said Pythias. "I would ask the king grant me 5 more days of life. Let me go home to say goodbye to my wife and children and to put my household in order. I will return. You have my word." The king, in disbelief, shook his head. "Do you expect me to trust you would return? Impossible. What guarantee would you give to convince me you would keep your promise?" Pythias' good friend Damon stepped up beside his friend and said to the king, "I would take his place. If he does not return, kill me instead." The king, shocked by this offer, replied, "Very well, but you are a fool, for I would not hesitate to order your death at sunset 5 days hence, if Pythias isn't here. You will die in his place if he does not return." "I have no doubt he will keep his word," said Damon. The bewildered king ordered Pythias to be released and Damon to take his place in prison. 2 days passed and the king grew more curious. He visited Damon in prison, and the king asked Damon if he regretted this decision he had made with his friend. Damon said he did not. He trusted his friend and knew he would return. The king visited the next day and asked Damon if he was worried. What if his friend saw his wife and children and would gladly break his word to stay with them? Damon answered with unwavered confidence that his friend would return. He was merely delayed. Perhaps he met trouble on the road, or the winds were unfavorable in his travels by sea. The king said he was a fool for believing the word of his friend. The 5th day arrived, the day of promised return, the day when Damon would be executed if his friend did not come. The sun made its slow, inevitable arc through the sky. Damon was brought from his cell to the king. The smug-faced King Dionysius looked down at the man who would be executed because he had made a mistake the king had not made, to trust another. The king taunted Damon. "Damon, where is your friend? It has been 5 days hence and I do not see him." Damon calmly replied to the king, "He is my friend. He will return if possible." The king ordered the man to be taken to the executioner. Damon was led away to the city square and up the platform where he would meet his end. A hood was placed over his head, and the king yelled out, "Damon, What kind of friend you are, if only Pythias was such a friend to you. Do you now regret this deal you have made? Do you now regret trusting the word of your friend? With straight spine, the hooded Damon yelled, "Even now, I trust he will return." The king waved his hand, and the executioner forced Damon onto the chopping block. Taking hold of the axe, the executioner raised it to take the man's head when a scream was heard from the back of the crowd. "Stay your hand. It is I, Pythias. I have come as promised. Do not kill the man." Pythias shoved his way to the platform. The man's clothing was in tatters. He was covered in cuts and bruises. Pythias rushed to his friend and said, "Damon, my ship was wrecked in a terrible storm, and robbers attacked me on the road. I ran the entire way as quickly as I could. I am here, my friend." Pythias turned to the king and said, "Release my friend. I am ready to meet my executioner." King Dionysius stood stunned at what had just happened. Never had he believed the man would return. He was deeply moved by the loyalty and love these two men had for each other. The crowd begged for mercy for the men. The king raised his hand to stop the clamor and said, "Never have I seen such friends as Damon and Pythias. Never did I know such faith and loyalty could exist in men. Neither shall die. Their friendship should be allowed to live." The King's Hall podcast exists to make self-ruled men who rule well and win the world.
Well, gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the King's Hall podcast. I am one of your hosts, Eric Kahn, joined today by Damon and Pythias.
Whoa! Whoa! I would not make that offer.
Dan, I'd go all the way.
Wow, I'm humbled. Thank you.
If a tyrannical king ever threatens one of us with death, we got to make a pact right now.
Yeah,
Right now.
I'd do it. I'd trust you.
My guy.
I'd trust you.
That's powerful stuff.
Probably.
Yeah,
In the comfort of my chair in our recording studio, I would trust you.
Here we say.
Here we stand.
And I really hope
and
we don't
sit.
have to see the metal, the true metal on this one.
Indeed. Well, gentlemen, in this episode, we're going to be talking about exactly this, about how friendship shapes men, how it shapes women. But in particular, as we continue with this theme of fatherhood, we're going to be talking about how fathers are made to teach their children friendship. Now, unfortunately, Dan, as you mentioned in the cold open, it's rare for men to have male friendships anymore. So we're going to talk about why some of this is. I think it's an important question as we talk about how friendship can be given to our children. We need to understand it for ourselves. So we're going to unpack that in the problems of fatherhood, friendship, and passing that on to children. But it reminded me, by the way, of a meme. You guys remember this meme? It was floating around a few years ago, and they said, everybody talks about the miracles of Jesus, but nobody talks about the real miracle. He was a man in his 30s, and he had 12 male friends.
Yep.
That gets straight to the heart of the issue, doesn't it?
So true.
And then finally, gentlemen, this episode, we're going to be talking about how this friendship can be passed on to our children just practically, pragmatically. How do we actually teach them these things? So I want to start with the importance of friendship in general. One of the responses that we get so often to the King's Hall podcast is that people say, I really enjoy the friendship on the show. So, Dan, either we're really good actors or there's real friendship represented in the three of us.
I think we're good at acting.
We're good at
We're really good at acting. No, we are friends. We're good friends. And so why is it appealing?
Yeah.
It's because it doesn't exist in abundance as it used to. You know, that was part of my my first comment in the cold open was that brotherhoods don't exist. You can even look back at like my grandfather. Granted, I don't, you know, the Knights of Columbus and the Templar, the Masons, and stuff like that. Like real bad stuff. Okay. But he had a lot of close friends. I mean, they would go square dancing together. They would hang out. Like they had their own bars that they would go to, like the VFW. 'Cause my grandfather was a veteran, and so even military type buddies. You know, so there were social structures, and the culture lent itself more to cultivating friendships. And I mean, all you have to do is just look around today, just look at your own life and realize that those don't exist anymore. You have like coworker friends, which, I mean, I've had coworker friends before, and God bless them. I do not want to see them outside of work. You know, like they're buddies at work, but that's,
is this
that's about it.
us?
So anyway, so there are other, and then you've got, you know, you go to church for like, you know, an hour and a half every Sunday, and then that's about it. And you have an online life. Even at work, most of us work on a computer, you know, so there's just not a context in which to build friendship. And so it is rare today. And it is strange in a way that we are attracted to that, but it's not uncommon because all you have to do, we'll get into this, is look online at other friends, digital friends, and people want to join the conversation. They want to be a part of the group. They want to involve themselves in the friendship, and they are just starving for it because it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, yeah. It's so sad that so many people today know all of the inside jokes, and they feel a very intense connection with people who have no idea who they are, with Mr. Beast and his friends. I mean, that's a YouTube. That's fairly novel, but I mean, even think about with Chandler, and I've never watched the show Friends, but I think Chandler and Monica and all the people from the show Friends.
That's a TV show.
Yeah,
Friends?
That's what it was. It was like real popular show about a group of friends.
And I think there's probably an aspect that's just, it's part of our nature to be attracted to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be a part of that. And some of it could be nostalgia or some other feelings of connection, having shared inside jokes before and having shared the camaraderie of friendship and being attracted to it. But it's not a substitute
It's
for
not
the real thing.
And that's the problem, is so many people they can do all of that. They could describe all of these friendships, and they feel a very close friendship or relationship with people. And again, it can be good. Sam and Frodo, any good story does this. It draws you into the characters. But then when that doesn't exist at all in your real life, and then you start to do that with digital substitutes, where now, you can have all of this. You know all of the lingo of your Twitter sub niche, and you know all of the what's the battle of the day, and but do you know anybody? You guys have heard me mention John Michael Clark over at The Family Captain before. Well, The Family Captain is all about practical coaching for Christian husbands in family leadership and sex in marriage.
That's right. John Michael has an awesome system and program over there that's helped a ton of guys level up and go from being happily married to ecstatically married.
Well, the Family Captain has a conference coming up in Nashville this September 14th, 15th, and 16th, where John Michael, who is also a pastor, is going to be speaking. Of course, but they've also got Ryan Frederick of Fierce Marriage. Ryan's been in the marriage ministry game for a while now. He's a solid brother, and they've got Pastor Vernon Davis as well, who happens to be one of the alumni of the Family Captain program. So it's going to be an awesome weekend where husbands will be encouraged and equipped in practical self-leadership and family leadership.
So you guys should definitely check that out. And John Michael wanted the listeners of the King's Hall podcast to have 10% off on the conference. So when you register, use the code King's Hall, all caps, King's Hall, to get that coupon. So that's Nashville, September 14th to the 16th, code King's Hall, all caps, no spaces, and search The Family Captain on Eventbrite.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the thing is, this is actually just one granular issue in a bigger cosmic issue.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the earlier episodes from this season on fatherhood, we talked about fathers, like digital fathers, and we gave the example of the Dad, how do I, or whatever. Dad, how do I, YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And so even like digital fathers, like father-son, father-daughter relationships, digital friendships are now more common. There is a human relationship issue that we have right now. And so, I mean, friends are a massive part of that.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We'll delve into, in just a moment, some of the more, bigger issues of why people have a hard time making friends in our society, specifically our children. But gentlemen, I want to ask you, why is friendship itself such a powerful force in the world? And as you're answering that question, I think a big part of it is, what is it? So we may take this for granted. What is friendship? I think of the proverb, right? A brother is born for adversity.
Yeah.
We certainly heard that in the cold open. It reminds me also of a couple things. One is Band of Brothers. You know, it was not playing Leroy Jenkins through a computer screen that formed the Band of Brothers. But these guys were actually in the trench together. They were fighting alongside one another. They had seen some of the worst things, and they had been bonded together. When you watch the intro and outro on Band of Brothers, I'm assuming you guys have seen that.
Yes.
The way that they talk about each other, and even though they were like 90 years old when they were doing the documentary, they're like tears filling their eyes as they think about their brothers, both those who've fallen and those who made it through with them. So I just want to ask you, what is friendship, first of all? Answer that question, and then why so powerful?
You know, when I think about all of the passages in Scripture about friendship, and it makes distinctions consistently between different types of things that might look like friendship but aren't, like Proverbs 18:24 says, a man of many companions may come to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Proverbs 27:6, faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy. Ecclesiastes 4:9 and 10, two are better than one. For if one falls, he will lift up his fellow, but woe to him who is alone if he falls. A lot of these things have to do with, you know, like a companion might be a group of people you're around, but friends are people who take a clear and even courageous interest in your ultimate good. They love you, and so they want your ultimate good. They don't just, it's not just a relationship of some mutual benefits. It's not just like, you know, we happen to be doing coworkers are like this. You can feel like they're friends sometimes. You know, you think about, I worked at Starbucks, and you kind of know the other people there, and you laugh together, and you have some inside jokes. But it's like, biblically speaking, it seems as if real, true friendship is so focused on the good of the other that it's willing to even wound the other, take risk. It's like a linking of life to where you're saying, I want to see you built up in Christ and in every other way. I want to see your house, your legacy built. No, you want to see my house, my legacy built. It's like there's a depth there.
It seems like a lot of it, Brian, what you're describing is, I think of David and Jonathan, I think of Naomi and Ruth. It's really about like covenant pledging to one another.
Yeah.
And we think about the friendship of the Lord being kind of the primary example.
Yeah.
But Ruth saying to Naomi, where you go, I will go.
Yeah.
Your people will be my people. It's kind of like the height of friendship.
Yeah, Christ is a friend to sinners, meaning like he's not going to just allow them to continue in that state, but he's also not going to crush them. He knows them deeply. There's a love there that is genuine and from the heart. I mean, those kinds of elements there, they can be built around lots of mutual goals, and there's lots of context where friendship can be built. But like the ideal friendship is that band of brothers where you're like, yeah, he would die for me and my people, and I would die for him and his people.
Yeah, I actually find it really interesting in the story of David and Jonathan. So many people want to turn it really gay, you know, when they say that, you know, they had a love that surpassed the love of women. But it's such a different relationship than a husband and wife, because it would be inappropriate for a wife to say, I'll give my life for my husband, right? But for two men that are closer than brothers, we look at the story of Damon and Pythias and say, like, that is just.
Yeah.
You know, that is good.
Yeah.
Or a band of brothers saying, like, I will give my life for yours. And it's the other way around. It's such a mutual sacrificial sort of relationship that it is a different type of relationship than a husband and wife.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that he says that, is because they would give their lives for one another in a way that would be inappropriate in a married relationship.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It also makes me think about, you know, as we unpack something like what would be the keys to friendship, I was thinking about how we've been aligned with each other here in Ogden. One of the things that has, I think, been a key to this friendship is we all have the attitude of burning the boats.
Yeah.
Like, you come here, you plant your roots. We've worked through conflict very differently when you say to one another, well, we're here no matter what forever, so I guess we better work through it. It's sort of like in a marriage.
Yeah.
When you say we don't even talk about divorce. we know that we have to work through the issue. So we're committed to doing that, and that shapes the friendship. So as you guys think about friendship, what would be some other keys to friendship formation?
Mm-hmm. You know, it's interesting that you bring that up about like burning the boats, because it makes me think of one of the keys. To the extent that we feel that way, and it's not even just about like New Christendom Press or making this kind of, at the core, really, it's that we're in a church community where, and everything a church community should be, where we're saying, this is the place I'm going to give my life to these people, this place, this church, the name of Christ here in Utah and beyond, as it, Ogden and beyond, as the Lord hopefully blesses and extends the network and roots of friendship and connection. But that to me is the key. It's not even just like a work relationship thing. Everything we're doing with podcasts and whatnot could die tomorrow, and we would still all be here trucking, because what we're aligned around is the most fundamental central mission of the Christian man and family. That's where the roots of this friendship have been built. Like Dan and I have been friends and pushing the plow together before any podcasting or whatever. Like we were here.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Taking shots and building and fighting and doing all in the church.
Well, and Brian, you bring up a really good point. I think mission, friends and mission, but particularly for men. Men are, I've often heard this, like men are, rather than being face-to-face relationally as much, they want to be side-to-side.
Yeah.
So side-to-side building things, fighting in the trenches, that sort of thing. It seems like mission would be really important. So Dan, I want to get your thoughts on why mission. Like, could you have great friendships with no mission?
Yeah, I think one of the keys to mission is having a similar vision and principles, right? Because if you don't have a similar principles to another person, it makes other things. I was going to talk about loyalty. It makes loyalty really difficult because your principles, your virtues, the things you're aiming at are actually different. You cannot be loyal to that person because they're actually aiming at a different thing. And so I know you're asking about mission probably in a little different way, but I'm thinking is like, what are the values of your life? What are you pointed at? What does success look like?
Yeah.
What is an entire thrust to your life?
Yeah.
And if those things are different, that's going to be really, really hard. And you know what's funny is often I think that, especially in like Reformed circles, we think, well, that means like we have to have theological like-mindedness. And that's not it. That's not it at all. That's not what I talk about. Principles. Theology is just kind of an outflow of some of your principles. That's a symptom, not an actual principle in itself. Like being a Calvinist is not a principle. That is an outflow of your principles. Wanting to understand, how God operates in the world and with people, specifically with Calvinism and soteriology and salvation. And so you can get along with a diverse theological, background, but the aim has to be similar. The aim has to be similar. Otherwise, how are you supposed to spur your brother on? How are you supposed to spur your friend on to success and to correct him if you're actually not even pointed at the same thing? So I think that is one of the absolute keys. You'll even see this in family dynamics as kind of like a side note. Why do you look at some families and you're like, you guys like get jacked to like have game night?
Yeah.
Like family get-togethers are like, you're like stoked for it. I'm excited. I'm going to go hang out with the family. And then other people are like, it's like this monumental event of dread going to hang out with family. Like Thanksgiving, Lord help me, I do not want to go. And a lot of it comes down to shared values. What are they pointing at? They're pointing at something different. It becomes almost incompatible to have relationships with people that have such different values. So mission is a huge part of that. Mission is a huge part of it because by nature, so when friends, I think have to be loyal. That's one of the main virtues of a good friend is loyalty, because you think about what an enemy would do is betray you. Like that would be the opposite of being loyal is betrayal. That's why it's so hard when you're watching a movie and you see a friend, turn on his friend.
Like Robert the Bruce.
Right, yeah.
Those moments.
That sense of betrayal, like, I thought you were for me.
Well,
Judas, I thought that you were, well, Jesus wasn't fooled, but the other disciples, it must have been perplexing and like, it was horrible. to
lack
have
of
this
loyalty.
sense of betrayal.
Yeah, it's interesting too because one of the things that Brian had mentioned from Proverbs is that a friend sometimes wounds with his words. He speaks the truth to his friends, and a lot of times in the moment that can feel like disloyalty, but it's actually the opposite.
Yes, highest loyalty.
So one of the things I've noticed is this, particularly online, but like you'll have groups of people who all for one reason or another fighting together on some internet issue, which makes you wonder how real it is. But then it's like you sort of have the like we won't correct our friends mentality.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. I think it would be helpful for people to know this. Like that's something that we're doing all the time, actually, and even welcoming with each other of saying.
Most of the time welcoming.
Where are my
Eventually welcoming.
Yes, that's right. Why is that such an important part of friendship, Brian?
Well, like when Dan's talking about loyalty and principles, and this is such a key to this part because when you have loyalty, your ultimate loyalty is to your friend's good. And so the principles are really important. What are we trying? How do we evaluate what is good and what is not in their life, my life, our shared mission, all of that kind of thing? And a lot of times, like you can have surface disagreements and things about that. But if you share the same ultimate common good principles and that you're aiming for, what are we trying to do together? What are we aiming for? And it's not just like, we like to go mountain biking together because that's fun, or we hunt together or whatever. But it's like, no, what are we aiming for? Well, at the bottom, across all kinds of different disagreements and different wirings and gifts and like different personalities, it's like, what are we aiming for? The kingdom and glory of Christ amidst this people, down through the generations, in our families, building one another up. That's what we're doing. And so if we're all loyal to that, then, and we know that that's in our friend's best interest, and he agrees with that, he's like, yeah, that is the best interest. Then when you come and you say, I think that you're not living in alignment with your principle here, and you bring correction or counsel or even wounding, then what are you doing? Well, you're actually saying, friend, we all agree on this shared glory that we're aiming for. We're trying to win this glory together. And I'm going to wound you now because you're going left off of that path. And so let me wound you. And like sometimes right away, oh, thanks, man, I needed to hear that. And then sometimes 3 months later when you're like, God, dang it, they were right. It's always Dan. It's always Dan when Eric and I 6 months later are like, was he right again? That dog.
How did he know this?
It's like,
Well,
and
actually,
then you steer back.
That's a really important aspect of friendship because if you have friends that are unwilling to do that, they're not actually friends.
Exactly.
They're like
Yeah.
companions. Actually, Proverbs 19 says, wealth makes many friends.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned mountain biking and hunting. Like, I'm sure that if you're in hunting or fishing or something like that, you've got, and you're any good at it, you'll have a host of people that want to be your buddies all of a sudden. They see a picture of a really big fish or like a nice buck or something like that, and they're like, hey, buddy.
Where'd you catch that?
Yeah. What's going on?
What bait were you using?
Maybe you take me out sometime,
Yeah,
like, and obviously like if you're wealthy, you've probably experienced this before. A lot of people want to, get close to you, but those people wouldn't risk the benefit of the relationship
For your good.
for your good. They're in it for their own good. And that's the key. They're in it, that relationship for their own good, not the good of their friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important. One last thing I guess I want to talk about regarding friendship is, it's good for women, but it's good for men especially because I think for men it doesn't happen anymore is male-only spaces. Anthony Esolen talks a lot about this principle, how dynamics change when women are present. I was recently reading an article, I think it was on Harper's Bazaar, which is a bizarre place for me to read an article. But the lady was talking about how frustrated women are that men don't have friends. Because she said it turns men into emotional gold diggers, meaning they become draining to their women because the women are like, because he doesn't have male friends, he's always coming to me and dumping all of his problems, and he doesn't do anything with other men, so he's kind of like a leech. I think it was like, this article is a little old, but it was, I think, kind of the beginning of people starting to see the nice guy syndrome was a problem. Like this guy who just lives as a doormat to his wife or to his woman is actually not something that's desirable for women. And so all the women in this article were like, yeah, actually, I want my guy, I want my husband to have male friends and do male things together.
Yeah.
So talk to me about male spaces. And as you're thinking about this, like, Brian, your boys, Dan, your boys, they're going to see you having male spaces or not.
Mm-hmm.
How is that going to impact them? So spaces, male spaces, why is that so important?
And I think we've lost both. We've lost both male-only spaces and female-only spaces because of this egalitarian lie that men and women are interchangeable. And so there's nothing really different. What's the difference between a group of men and women and a group of men only or a group of women only? It's a result of those principles being those bad principles being worked out culturally.
Mm-hmm.
And what it does particularly for men is it ultimately makes them, I think, very weak, because women they're literally not designed to lead a man and sharpen him in the same way that other men are. And it does the same thing for women. Men are not designed to sharpen women in exactly the same way that women are. Like, that's why Titus 2 is in the Bible. You need older women to teach the younger women to love their husbands, to be workers at home, all this glorious, rich sort of stuff. So what happens when you put all of the ladies together and they're, again, principles, mission, loyalty, they're all working together to spur one another on to become the glory of man, to become the most glorious home-nurturing, child-rearing, husband-loving, fruitful vines that they can be. Glorious things happen that won't happen if you just had spaces where men were always there. Changes the dynamic. For men, the same thing happens, and women literally don't get this. It's like a foreign thing to them. If they were to be able to observe without the men knowing that they were observing how male-only spaces work, they might be appalled. And I don't mean because of like sin. There's foolish aspects in fallen male-only spaces too. But they would just be like, what are you guys doing?
Well, particularly,
you're so mean to each other.
I was going to say the way that we razz each other. Every now and then I'll tell my wife, oh, yeah, this interchange happened. This is what Dan said to me. And she'll be like, well, are you going to talk to him about that? And I'm like, no, I thought it was funny.
No, It's hilarious. I never tell my wife, like almost ever, do I like put any kind of like church leading, like any of the things we do together. It always involves we're fighting outside conflict. We're like always needing to make sure we're staying aligned, and there's always like that male sharpening happening. I never tell my wife about that stuff because it wouldn't help her. She's not made to bear that load. It strengthens us. It's good for us, but it's diesel fuel in an unleaded engine for her.
Yeah, it's really interesting contrasting the article that you talked about, men unloading their problems on their wives or whatever.
Yeah.
If you're in a male-only space with just your buddies and you're like, oh, man, work was really hard today. This guy was really kind of a jerk and like, just like grumbling on and on. Eventually, it's inevitable. One of the guys will say, wow, if I wanted to hear this much fussing, I would have hung out with my kids, or something like that. And that's appropriate. But for your wife to say that would be very disrespectful. Really bad.
Yeah.
That is why it is vital that men have other men to correct them, because you can speak to one another in a way that it would be completely inappropriate in mixed company.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting, too, I was thinking of the movie 1917. And you remember the scene where his friend has just died. And the other like commanding officer from the British troops, he walks up to him and he sort of gives him a hug and he's like, I'm sorry about the loss of your friend. And he said, you probably already know this, but it doesn't do to dwell. He's like, get in the truck. And I think that's something men can also do for each other in the context of friendship is, I'm really sorry. This is really hard, but you need to take the next step forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you need to do. One of the things I've noticed in a lot of the articles online, you can find a lot of these that talk about why we don't have male friendships. They're like, well, because men aren't emotionally available enough and they need to see therapists more and they need to be able to talk about their feelings.
Together.
And
they need to have a good small group time where they just talk.
It is actually really gay. So, Dan, why is therapy? Dan's face. Why is therapy not?
It's just my normal face. I don't know why is therapy not helpful? There's a space definitely where men need to confide and to talk things through.
Mentors, advisors, counsel.
Yes, absolutely. But the fact of the matter is a therapist is interested in getting you to come back primarily. That's their source of income. And they don't have the tools that will help you. One of those tools, like we talked about, is the loyalty of a friend telling you hard things. You know, and that's why therapy is not generally going to be helpful whatsoever, because a lot of times the thing that a man needs to hear from a friend is something that's very hard. And you are not going to receive it well from a person you are paying.
Red meat is a staple of a healthy, protein-packed diet, but not all meat is created equal. That's why I buy my meat from Salt and Strings Butchery. Salt and Strings is owned and operated by my friends Quinn and Samantha Bible, and the meat they offer is raised, harvested, and processed exclusively in Southern Illinois. It's cut and packaged by my friends Quinn and Anthony, and not only is it the best meat I've ever had, well, all their meat is sourced from local farms that share our Christian values. Salt and Strings is now offering a beef and hog box that can be shipped directly to your door. The 15-pound beef box features 100% black Angus beef and includes ribeyes, T-bones, sirloin, chuck roast, fajita meats, and ground beef. You can order your beef box today for just $259. They will send it directly to your door. The hog box is $239 and features premium Duroc pork, including 8 thick pork chops, one of my all-time favorites, pork steaks, cured and sliced bacon, ground pork, bratwurst, and breakfast sausage links. You can place your order today at saltandstrings.com or use the link in the show notes. And also be sure to follow Salt and Strings on Instagram. We'll also include the link in the show notes. Well, don't you think it's interesting, Dan, like the opposite? We've talked about this a lot. The Vernon Davis with Mike Singletary.
Yeah.
You remember his epic rant, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Can't win with him?
Can't do anything with him.
I want winners. And but then because, Mike, he was recognizing basically in his son that, Vernon Davis was acting like a child.
Yeah.
He corrected him. And later, Vernon Davis comes back like at the Super Bowl and he was like, I really appreciate what he did for me. So you're not going to get that from a therapist.
No, you're not.
You need a male
space. They have an interest as a customer to keep you.
Right.
That's part of it. And the tactics and tools that they use are not great. So, but a friend will know you. That's another part of friendship that's really important, is that you are known. Not in the way of husband and wife, but as a man to man, because you have a similar perspective on life. You have similar ideas of what you're aiming for with masculinity. You have also similar perspectives on the struggles of being a man, such as like the struggles of leadership in your home, the struggles of being able to provide for your family. Like those things, only another man is going to really be able to identify with. And then because they're going to know what the aims should be, what the virtues should be, they're going to be the ones, a friend will be the one to hit you in the soft underbelly of your weakness in order to strengthen you there, to harm you for your own good, which is far more valuable than just going to somebody and just like offloading your emotions. I was going to say something really offensive, but just to offload your emotions and then at the end say like, oh, that was really good. Actually, it reminds me of a book that I read a long time ago. I don't even know if it's any good, but because it's been so long, it was called Fight Clubs. And it was about masculine friendships, specifically in defeating pornography. And the author talked about how often you'll get these groups of guys that get together that all struggle with pornography. And essentially they do that same thing that you would with a therapist, which is to say like, oh, I'm confessing this thing. I'm offloading. I'm, feeling emotional. I feel guilt. And you just offload it onto the group. And he called it cheap grace because you never actually repent of your sins. Meaning like you actually turn away and
Everyone's
then
like,
longer walk in it.
They all do
I did the same thing, brother. Like, we all stumble like, and over again, you're getting this cheap grace without actually ever receiving the fullness of grace and repentance from your sins. And the thing is like a friend will know that. A friend will call you to a higher purpose. And a therapist is not motivated by that.
Yeah, he's for your good. He's going to say, no, do the hard thing. Do the hard thing now, not the long, much harder wrong thing that's easier up front. It's like, because he's for you. He's loyal to the principles that hopefully are God-ordained principles for your good and glory, and he's going to love you enough to do that. So when you lose this, when you replace it with digital alternatives or ersatz friendship, like what you're losing is not an insignificant thing.
Did you say ersatz?
Ersatz.
What does that mean?
Oh, in World War II, they would, in England, they're an island. Shipping's been disrupted by the U-boats and all that, so they're having a hard time getting food and supplies. So they would start making fake versions of food, like coffee that's chicory and sawdust. Literally, they'd put sawdust in flour. They call it ersatz food.
Really?
Stretched with fillers. It's kind of like how our food is today, except without World War II.
And without something natural like sawdust.
Yeah.
It's
So
just
ersatz was the
chemical
name
powders.
for it.
Yeah.
I actually don't know where that comes from.
Yeah,
It's
that's
probably like some
Yeah,
European
surprised you
word.
didn't know that, Eric.
Yeah, I had no clue.
Sorry, guys.
Pretty dumb blue collar over here. Not from England.
Eric was just asking like he knew. He was just asking for the
listener.
listeners.
Yes. Brian, it's actually a good segue into what I want to talk about now, which are some of the enemies of friendship. You talk about some of these counterfeits. We get this a lot in the Proverbs as well, and things like worthless friendship for our kids. So Proverbs is from fathers to sons and daughters, but to children. And it's talking about how to avoid the foolish kind of friend. And so we're going to talk about that, and then maybe some environmental factors that make building friendships for our children difficult. But Brian, I want to start with something you mentioned here. When we were talking about the outline, you brought this up, and I think it's a really good point. But helping our kids avoid bad digital friends like maybe Mr. Beast. So just talk to me about what did you mean by that?
Yeah. So you get good business that is God glorifying asks the question, how can I love my neighbor in X niche of the economy? How can I love my neighbor who needs to eat? I can provide healthy, high-quality food at a reasonable price that will allow me to flourish and him to do well. I'm going to provide that service with love and excellence. That's like good business sense. You're looking at a human need, and then you're meeting it in a healthy way. So when sin gets into anything, it's parasitic. It can't create anything ex nihilo. It has to corrupt something that exists. So when sin gets into the business world, one of the things that happens is that it looks at human needs and then it latches onto them and monetizes them in a way that's actually destructive to the end user. So one way this happens with the human need for community and relationship and friendship is that rather than writing a good story that like Frodo and Sam is helping you by latching on to that need you have for friendship and saying like, what a friend that is. Man, I want to be like that. I want a friend like Frodo. I want a friend like Sam.
But like in real life.
In real life. And it's calling you further up. There's a really craven way of providing the alternative in a way that is just cheaply monetizing you and actually not calling you up into good friendship. It's providing you with a false model, and it's providing you with like a drug alternative to the real thing. So when I think of this, I do think of something like the Mr. Beast YouTube channel, where the friendship that they have, it's not around a glorious mission. It's just not. The mission they have is to make the biggest YouTube channel they have, and like to goof off and have. It's good. Like having fun's good. Goofing off is great with your friends. But what are they trying to build? Like a $20 billion YouTube empire, pretty much. And what kind of friendship are they presenting to you? Well, the kind apparently where is his name?
Chris.
And is it Johnny? What's Mr. Beast's name?
I actually don't know.
I can't remember.
I don't
Whatever
remember.
Mr. Beast and his friend Chris, who's like on HRT hormone replacement therapy. He's going
left his
going
wife.
full tran.
Had a wife and kid, left them.
Yeah, and so Mr. Beast is like defending him, encouraging him in this and his own destruction, basically saying this is what friends do. This is what friends do for each other. They help one another ruin their lives and, basically sin against everybody in their life and make a shipwreck of everything.
And
that's what
it.
friends do because friends accept one another. Well, yeah, and then our kids watch that, and it's combined with like digital fentanyl in the way that they're cutting their videos and doing all this stuff. And then the kids are subconsciously and consciously absorbing this message of here is the model for friendship. That's one level. And then in addition to that, it's also presented in a way where it's like more and more YouTube channels, more and more videos, more and more content. And what happens is kids go, I don't need friends. I have Mr. Beast. I have my Twitch, and then I have the people I watch on Twitch, and I have And they just start building a stable of digital fake friends, often who are not actually good at all. And it slowly leaches out until they've replaced all of their need for real friendship, they feel like, with an ersatz version of it. It's acorns ground up and roasted and pretending to be coffee. It's not coffee.
What's really interesting, because you can read a lot of the studies on this, but we've talked about it. Gen Z, the iPhone, all that, it's caused psychological damage to our children.
Yeah.
They're weaker than
Demonstrably.
ever. Suicide rates are astronomical, all of this. The transgenderism movement in particular has been infiltrating kids' minds through primarily places like Snapchat.
Mm-hmm.
But even adults today are replacing friendships with online relationships. There's a number of times online where I've seen people ask really intimate questions on Twitter, like, hey, what do you guys think about this? What should I do? And my first reaction is this person clearly has no friends in real life.
Oh, yeah.
Because who in the world would put stuff on there? So it's becoming like a replacement for people in real life.
Yeah.
Which becomes very problematic. It also subjects our kids, though, to a lot of what end up being worthless people. Originally, my youngest, I let him watch some Mr. Beast for a time because I thought, okay, it seems pretty clean. It's funny.
Yeah, they're just doing some hijinks.
And then all this stuff kind of comes in, and you're like, okay, problematic. Other people might be asking questions. The one that we've been watching a little bit lately is Dude Perfect. I think those guys are Christians.
Yeah.
So hopefully we don't have to worry about trannyism. They seem a lot more solid. But it really becomes the same thing. Like, if you are going to do that at all, this goes back to Digital Matrix. You're really going to have to limit it and go make friends out in the real world.
And then what's great is when you can see. So the Dude Perfect guys seems like those are Christian men. I don't know about a theological background, whatever. They seem like normal,
Probably
Big
Baptist.
Eva kind of Baptist. Okay, so but it actually does a decent job of displaying like male-only friendship around silly things. But they have a shared mission, and they say it's to glorify God. Like they'll say it in their shows, whatnot, their big tour. So if my kids watch that, and I watch it with them or something like that every once in a while, and then I feel great if I can then see my kids going out and having similar friendships.
Right.
Where they're like doing the same. Maybe they're like, oh, yeah, let's do a trick shot competition like Walter.
Yeah.
Or
Actually,
whatever.
Walter and Ari were doing that the other day.
Yeah, they're like bros, our sons, Eric and my sons. And so that's great. But if I, as a father, if I see my daughters or my sons getting into this kind of world and they're not actually doing it themselves, then I'm like, let's shut that down and let's go make some friends. Because one you need, the other one you don't. It can be a servant, right, of good friendship to give you some models in stories and video and film and whatnot. That's a good servant. Can be. But if I'm not seeing my kids actually go out and have friends like Tall Guy and Purple Hoser, whatever they call it.
I don't know what you're talking about.
That's okay, Dan.
So that is a good question because I had no idea what that was about either, Dan. But I want to ask you, what are some of the other main enemies of friendship? We're sort of talking about digital media being a foolish friend to our kids, but there's a lot of other things that we could talk about as key factors. So what would you say?
Yeah, I'm sure I'm getting ahead of us a little bit, but one of the main enemies I think that are preventing our children from having friends is that we're not setting them up in the context in which they can build friends. Okay, so and we're not displaying what that looks like. So I think one of the better ways that you can build friendship amongst your kids is by identifying another family, in your church or something like that, with similar age kids that you get along with. Like this is the ideal, right?
Mm-hmm.
You find another family and you're like, we're friends. Like that's what's going to happen. We're going to hang out.
Dude, we just become best friends.
We're going to do, we're going to hang
Yes,
out
we
every
did.
week. Our kids are going to be friends. Like they're going to hang out. Because part of the reason that your children are going to be attracted to a Mr. Beast friendship or whatever the Twitch streamer or YouTube channel is that they haven't been inoculated against fake digital friendship by having the real thing.
Yeah.
And so another way that I think that we're not winning our kids to friendship or that are enemies of friendship, and this might seem a little strange, is by not winning their hearts towards friendship. Because the thing is, as much as we want to define what a friend is, it's loyalty, shared mission, vision, being willing to harm one another for their good. We can define it, but you'll notice, like, if you ask the question, what is a friend? The first thing that comes to most people's mind, I think, will be, oh, it's Frodo and Sam. Like that it'll be that.
Yeah.
We think about it in story because that's going to be one of the best ways that you can see the example of friendship is that they need to be told the right stories. Your children need to be won by the right stories.
Yeah.
That's why I really do think Lord of the Rings is one of the greatest examples of this, is by reading the right stories to your kids and by communicating to them and winning their hearts to this idea of friendship and training them to be good friends. They'll realize pretty quickly that the digital version is just a cheap substitute.
Merry
it's
and
like,
Pippin.
Some artificial sugar substitute. It's just not, it's not the real thing.
And if they've never tasted it, if you're in World War I, World War II, and your fake coffee shows up or your fake flour and you've never had real bread, you don't know.
Right.
You
No,
can't
that's a good
detect the difference.
What actually reminds me, Proverbs 27:7, Dan, as you were talking about this, I was thinking about it. One who is full loathes honey, but to the hungry, even what is bitter tastes sweet.
Oh.
So to somebody who's starving,
It's really good.
you think about it, you're like, when you're starving, you're like, oh, these potato chips taste amazing. Well, yeah, because you're starving. But if you were well nourished, and you might turn them down. The other thing I think about, Dan, in terms of like social changes in America since World War II, there's actually a book on this by Robert Putnam called Bowling Alone. And he talks about how social capital has been just destroyed in America. We lack community events. Anthony Esselin will talk about the same thing. We used to have adult league baseball.
Yeah.
There used to be all sorts of community centers and people would get engaged together. I think TV has also played a big part in the changing social dynamic. I remember in Louisville, Kentucky, we were going to seminary and we had a power outage for a week. A week of no power.
Wow.
And so it was really interesting because everybody went to their front porches. It's the middle of summer. It was extremely hot. We didn't have AC. So everybody went to their porches, and I saw and talked to neighbors I had never even seen before. But when the power was on and it came back on, immediately people would come home from work. You'd never even see them. They'd enter their home or their apartment. They would go in. They'd turn on the TV. That was it. No social interaction.
When life is hard, it's easier to make friends. And I don't mean like emotionally hard, conflict hard. I mean like when there's actual physical challenge and discomfort, that actually genuinely helps in friendship formation.
No, you're right, because there's a shared experience there,
Yeah.
which is another key of friendship, is a shared experience, shared interest.
Yeah.
That's
Suffering together.
Eric and I both have gone elk hunting, backpacking, you've gone backpacking before.
Yeah.
There is something that happens when you're encountering difficulties, I'm sure, like rock climbing and things like that, the same way.
Yeah.
Like when you encounter hardship and difficulties and it's a shared misery, for some reason, that really does bring friendship. War, I think
war.
the stories of like war, and friendships that are forged there, around shared mission and hardship.
Yeah.
There's just
big
no
time.
replacement for it.
Pastoring people through hard situations together. Those are memories that come to mind, like through suffering, when we're joining together to do that.
That's a good. That's a really good point. Yeah, go ahead.
Another aspect of enemies of friendship, we've kind of circled around it a lot, but just like the disintegration of life, a lot of what we're talking about comes back to this, that the Industrial Revolution and then the information technology revolution successfully disintegrated life by doing an easy button for everything, so that you no longer had to go, like you can get everything you want
and never leave your
you
home.
feel like you can without ever leaving your house. You get digital friendship. You can get your groceries delivered.
Yeah.
You don't ever have to go to like have your favorite restaurant where you go and know the staff and the owners. Everything's hyper optimized and hyper digitalized. And what it's done is it's actually cut the root of the life together, where before that it would be common to where you would have in a community, you'd have all of the basic needs of life would be connected to, you'd have a butcher, you would have a grocer, and it would be walking distance in your community. You would have all these things together that you couldn't live without. You'd have your church, your parish, like all these things shared together.
So what you're saying is there is a secret cabal that is organizing every aspect of life to make every man an island so that when they enforce their tyrannical rule, there can be no uniting amongst the people to overthrow the tyrants.
And
that's what you're saying.
They've given you the illusion that you have these connections and they have the power button to all of them, meaning they can immediately shut off all of your communication, all of your access, all of your social media like that. And then you're an island, truly. And you have no meaningful, hard-forged friendships. You're very easy to kill because you're fat and soft.
Well, why'd you look at me when you said that?
Your head is like a mirror.
He's also the hard man.
The shining.
He's the hard man.
Oh, and Eric's the hard.
Oh,
yeah,
boy.
I had to.
So, that's fine.
I could see myself in the baldness of your head.
I'm wearing a shirt that's a
reflecting
little
back,
too small today, so it makes me uncomfortable.
You look actually fit right now because you walked in. I was like, "Wow, Dan's been lifting."
No, it makes you soft and weak and vulnerable.
But think about this. Okay, bringing back that. So the enemy's disintegration. One of the things then is to bring back integration. Why do my kids have way better friends now than I had growing up? I grew up in the 90s. Part of it's because we lived a military life that's deeply unrooted. You're moving every 2 to 3 years, and you have friends, and then you don't anymore, and you don't learn how to make friends. But a lot of it has to do that their shared life grows out of the same social trunk, which is the church, the school, the social activities surrounding the church, school, family friendships. That is 90+% of their life experience. Grows out of psalm sing, St. Brendan's, church on Sundays, Sundays in the park with friends. That's what it grows out of.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the other things I was thinking about as you guys were talking is the way society has changed in terms of even things like financial inflationary economy type issues. So because of an inflationary economy, and then especially in the 80s and afterwards, you really get into the acceleration of this. And because of that, now moms have to go into the workforce. So moms and dads are both working twice as hard to bring home the same pay. So that's going to change family life. Then you add in, I think in America since at least probably about the same, the 80s. I mean, sports have been a big part of American culture, but generally they were recreational and family-centered.
Yes.
And then what happened is now everybody, you have 4 kids, and they're all in a competitive travel league, and there's only 2 parents. So those sorts of things divide the family as well. They really prohibit, everything is overscheduled. So it really prohibits the family from being together on a regular basis. That stuff is very, very disruptive. Obviously, we've talked about technology. As you think about, Dan, some of the other challenges, one of them I think would be like safety and what some authors have called safetyism. And I want you to think back to our childhoods. My mom didn't work. My dad worked. He made a good wage. We owned a home. We were in a neighborhood. There were copious amounts of unscheduled downtime. And my mom would say, "You boys go play." And we would go out in the street with the neighborhood kids, and we would play football, get in fights, build forts. This is like suburban Denver. I mean, the outskirts of Denver. So this isn't that long ago.
Build rickety bike jumps with.
But I mean, I'm even thinking about the new neighborhood where I live. You never even see kids outside. They like never leave the house. It's just like everything's well manicured, and pretty much all the neighborhoods I've grown up in the last 10 years, I never see people outside.
A lot of my neighborhood my kids' friends in the neighborhood, we make them come onto our property and play in our treehouse and blah, blah, blah. But it's like the only thing they ever want to talk about is Minecraft, Marvel movies, and
Star Wars, bro.
I don't know what the handheld video game console thing is, but they're always talking about it. It's not allowed on our property.
Is it a Game Boy?
I don't even think it's a Game Boy. I think it's something else. A Nintendo Switch. Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, that's all they want to talk. So even when you get them in the environment, you can't take the modern kid. You can take the modern kid out of the modern ecosystem, but you can't take the modern ecosystem out of the kid.
Yeah.
Not as catchy as the
It's really not.
song.
That wasn't a great phrase.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
No, I was going to say my childhood was a little bit different because I grew up in a rural area in a town that was known as the second safest city per capita in the U.S. So my experiences
Chicago?
were, yes, it was Chicago. Yep. No, it wasn't. So yeah, my experience was a little bit different because going outside and playing meant like there were no neighborhood kids. We just bummed around us boys. So anyway, so I'm probably not a good example.
So you're saying you grew up in a white supremacist community? is what you're saying.
Well, we were supremely white, so
Wisconsin.
Yeah,
yes.
but
Those are some
I
white
mean, like
people.
But
my
Dan-
family.
Yeah.
And yes, also that.
But we have listeners who are rural people. So I
Yeah.
actually, when I was 8, we moved to Denver. Just to be clear, I think I was 8 years old. Before that, I lived in a town of 1,000 people. It was the same as what you're describing. This is the shooting magpies. Was like our people would pay us to shoot magpies. That's what we did.
What a job.
But even then, okay, like today, everything is scheduled. Like if kids want to play together, you got to have a play date. And everything's like, are you wearing a seatbelt? I remember going fishing with my dad when I was like 5 years old. And you remember the trucks with the bench seat?
Oh, yeah.
Old square body Chevy. My dad never made me buckle. And like we'd be riding around in the truck and like we're not buckled in, just cruising through the country. There's fishing poles.
Dad hands you a cigarette for the
He
drive.
just hands you a cigarette for the drive. It's like,
Here, son.
and somehow we made it, but today it's like you see like 12-year-old kids in a booster seat because he doesn't meet the quote unquote weight regulations, and you're like, oh, come on. What is with the over safetyism, all that stuff in our culture? I think it's hard for kids then to experience friendship because everything's a play date. Everything's manicured.
Yes.
The other thing I would tie to this, as we kind of wrap up this section of problems, and then I want to get into the practical, helpful things that we can be doing to teach friendship. You remember this thing with the lady from Full House, right? Where they got in trouble for trying to get their kids into these elite colleges. Okay, you pair this with Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah.
Your kid has to be years ahead. So they're teaching them and getting them into the school sooner so they can be ahead of everybody else. And there's like this fixation with academic success, which actually doesn't mean that much anymore. But because of that, it's like every kid has to be like involved in 1,000 activities so that his, application letter looks amazing.
Credentialism.
Yeah.
Essentially. Yeah, they're obsessed with it, right?
Yeah.
Is this a good activity?
You know, one thing that that you said that really reminds me of something that I'd read from Esalen was the enemy of organized sports against friendship. I think it was boyhood development and things like that. But organized sports, part of like your over-organized life and your manicured life, the play date life, having organized sports rule as the predominant, fun activity for your children can be a big harm because they don't have to discover themselves, to make the rules themselves, to organize themselves, to lead themselves. Yeah,
Well,
that's
think
right.
about-
What do you do when you don't have an adult present and somebody gets hurt?
Yeah.
You tell them to toughen up,
Form your hierarchy.
walk it off.
To figure
that's
out
right.
where you stand in the hierarchy, which is not everyone at the top. It's not egalitarian. One kid at the baseball field that they're playing the kid pickup game, there's a couple kids that are in charge, and they're like, no, that wasn't out. You go home or I'm going to fight you. Like, that's how it works.
Well, it's kind of like the difference between the movie Sandlot and then you get into like these competitive leagues. I remember as a kid, our growing up was very much like Sandlot style. That's how baseball was played. It was just the neighborhood kids.
Man, what a great childhood. Shooting magpies, Sandlot.
I know.
You're in the outfield shooting magpies. Put the gun down for the pop fly.
Literally.
Go get 50 cents
Yeah.
to buy a new baseball.
Dude.
I mean, wow.
But
this
I
is
remember
amazing.
that
Idyllic.
in like 7th grade was like the first year I actually like played baseball.
Uh-huh.
But I'd grown up on like the Sandlot with my buddies.
Yeah.
Well, I started playing and they were like, you're fairly good for somebody who's never played. Well, it wasn't that I had never played.
Yeah.
But then I remember how like I got burned out by it because it was like the practices regimented. It was like a military lifestyle. Our school looked like a prison. And it was like I actually missed the Sandlot. Anyway, I think a lot of that's detrimental to kids forming their own friendships because everything is so structured.
It's all spoon fed.
With the banking industry in another tailspin and the Fed ready to raise interest rates again, many of you are asking, when will the madness stop?
Are you currently placing 10, 15, or 20% of your income into the volatile stock market and subjecting your hard-earned cash to the whims of Wall Street? You already know that this is not an effective and safe wealth-building strategy.
Our sponsor, Private Family Banking Partners, will show you a powerful and safe way to build guaranteed multi-generational wealth. With their guidance and step-by-step method, you will be able to create your very own privatized banking system.
Imagine being able to direct major portions of your monthly cash flow into your banking system and immediately start earning tax-free compound interest. Once established, you will have access to your money through a private online portal. While your money is earning uninterrupted compound interest, you can use that same money as collateral for other investments or to start a new business or self-fund major life expenditures. Best of all, no new money is needed to start.
See their contact information and access their free book in the show notes below.
That's what that's one of the problems with the YouTube thing too. It's just spoon-fed to you. It's finished product.
It asks
Consume
nothing
it.
of you.
Yeah, just consume it. You're not making it. You're just consuming it. So, like, what do we need to do for our friends? I think that's where we're going, practically.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
One of the first things when we're talking about teaching our kids friendship is don't spoon-feed everything for them. When we would go to Boy Scout camps, like especially as I transitioned from Boy Scouts into Scout, like leading as an adult with my dad, one of the great keys to a successful Boy Scout camping outing was making sure that the boys had to do it all themselves and that you established an elite adult camp where everything was awesome and you had great food and they weren't allowed to eat any of it while they suffered and failed because they had to go figure out who's in charge here. Like, and how do we figure ourselves out and then they suffer together and they learn and they actually become competent at it and they're having a great time and they talk about it like, what a great camp that was. And then they're like, you like literally brought a frozen London broil steak with no way of cooking it and starved for a whole day while smelling our amazing cooking over there and like slept in the dirt because you forgot you were miserable, but then they actually have friends and
Well, that's what I think.
Can't spoon feed them.
It was so amazing. I was thinking about Boy Scouts because the era when I was in, the dads were like Vietnam vets.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember one guy who was a truck driver and a Vietnam vet, and he's sitting there and we're like cooking breakfast and he's smoking a cigarette over like the white gas stove.
What a king.
And the kid is like, Mr. Whatever, I don't like that food. And he goes, well, son, I made it through Nam. He's like, we ate maggots to survive. You know, and he's like, goes through this whole story, and the kid's like about to cry, and he's like, go back to your tent.
Go back to your tent, son.
You'll eat it or you're starved.
Lick the day old Dinty Moore can.
They just don't care.
You can't spoon feed. Like, for our friends to have real friends, you have to like let them figure stuff out and stop trying to program every nuance of their whole life. You have to be like, you know, what's been great for some, like going and playing with Walter or like our sons hanging together, because they just do stuff. Like, they decide what they're going to do. Often it's dumb, but they have such a good time.
They do.
And no one's going to like, okay, kids, from 9:45 to 10:15, it's going to be quiet screen time. And then from 10:15, we're going to prepare our peanut butter and jelly lunches. It's like, no, they're going to go and do their thing.
Well, isn't that interesting? I was thinking even about the mainline church. Like when I grew up in the church, like the big box church, you know, a lot of things were so curated. Everything was programmed. One of the things we said at Refuge is we're not going to program your entire life with all these activities.
No.
Like, you know, we have simple things like I was thinking about the Sunday evening hangout.
Mm-hmm.
We're hanging out. If you want to come, bring a Frisbee, bring your shoes, and we'll kick a kickball. But it's pretty much not organized.
No.
And I think that actually makes it better.
It's way better.
What's wrong with like the overprogrammed church in regards to friendship?
Well, first, it goes back to the issue of expecting nothing from you, right? People, and this is, man, my skin just crawls when I hear this complaint about the lack of programs. Like, I just want a Bible study. I just want a youth group. I just want this. I just want that. Like, give me the services. I don't want to have to think. I'm not going to lead it. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to lead it.
I'm going to consume.
Like, I want to consume it. I just want, like a YouTube channel, I'm just going to ask that you give me everything and expect nothing from me in return. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it doesn't give you space to actually have those unscheduled events. It doesn't give you space for hospitality, which is such a key for friendships.
Well, isn't that crazy too? Because when you get to like, you know, I wish there were more programs. How do I get to know people? And I'm like, well, you sit around like 200 of them like every Sunday. And I'm like, here's what you do. You look at the person next to you and you're like, hey, do you want to come over for lunch? And they're like, yeah, but it would just be so much easier if we had a program or if we had a, you know, young whatever or an old. And it's like, well, no, we're actually trying to foster you doing the work.
Yeah. You eat lunch already, just make extra. and then have somebody else eat it with you. Table fellowship is huge for this.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you space for the kids to go, like, do their thing. Go
Space
play,
is key,
right?
though.
Space is absolutely key. It's really important for your kids to be bored. And it's really important for them to be bored with other friends that are bored.
Well, and the other thing that I've noticed, Brian, I don't know if you've seen it as well, but in a lot of the churches that were heavily programmatic, it didn't mean that people were healthier or had better relationships with each other.
No, they tend to still, the people that have good friendships have them because they're still doing everything Dan just said.
Yeah,
Like they're
right.
still
Outside
going
of
and
all
hanging.
that.
Like my dad is he's got some really good friends, and they're in a much more programmed church than ours. But it's like, what do? Well, they're pouring concrete this week at my dad's house together, and I unfortunately saw a shirtless pic of his friend pouring concrete, and I'm still scarred. But they go mountain biking. They're probably mountain biking literally right now. Like they're coming to that age of life where semi-retirement type of stuff. They're pouring into their church together. They're doing a lot of this, serving widows and things like that in the church. But it's because they're doing all those things anyway. The programs are like not the thing that did it. When you get the perfectly programmed church and you walk in and it's like, here's the conveyor belt of exactly how to be at this church. Man, especially if every stop along that conveyor belt is walk in this room at this time and someone will do something for you, leave, walk out. At the next time, there's going to be a thing you walk into, and then they take your kids, and you go here, and it's all convenient and easy, and there's no pain. And they'll do the thing for you. And instead, what we do is like on Tuesdays at 6 o'clock, come to our basement. It's going to be kind of hot, especially by the time everyone gets there. We're going to potluck it. You have to bring the food, or no one eats. Like we're not providing it. You just, in fact, we had to lecture them at one point, like bring more food. There's too many. Like and they were, oh, we have to do that. We eat together. The kids eat all the dessert. Then they all run into the old janky kitchen, and they just like every time I walk past that, like it's like Lord of the Flies in there. And then we all go up, and the kids are forced to sit down with their parents, and then we all have to sing. And if no one sing, we're learning how to sing our hymnal. If they don't, no one's gonna sing for. It's not a performance. No one. It's not choir. It's like come to our concert. Like no, they're learning how to be the choir. And then they hang out until Ben is annoyed because he has to go home, and he's the one locking up, and he's like, "Why is everyone still here?" Because they're friends.
Ben
And
is
then
too
we
gracious
leave.
to be annoyed
No, Ben's not
most
really annoyed.
days.
You know, or kickball, where the kids come and we're like playing an adult game of kickball, taking it way too seriously at Sunday nights at the park. And the kids are like, can we play? And we're like, yeah, but we're not giving you any mercy. And so Matt Halverson, every single time my son goes up to kick, he's right by the pitcher's mound. My son kicks it. He either catches him and gets him out immediately every time, or he gets the grounder and ruthlessly pegs him with it as he tries mercilessly to run to first base.
That is
And he
funny.
falls and skins his knee and tries not to cry. And I'm like, praise the Lord. My son is learning how to be a man. But all of it is like, there's very little at our church where you show up and someone's going to do something for you and then you leave.
Yeah.
And it comes back to this. I didn't realize this till we started talking, how important this principle of not spoon feeding things is for actual friendship formation.
Yeah, because one of the things you're doing, especially obviously pastoring, you're part of a church, and so we're thinking a lot about that. But parents could do the same things, where creating space in your kids' lives where you say you guys play in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to tell you everything to do. Like figure it out. So the
What
other
do we
day,
do? Well, there's some dirt. There's a stick.
the other day, my kids were, I don't know, they had 20 minutes. I'm upstairs getting ready to leave for work. And they had taken pickleball paddles and found a ball and set up in our basement like this full basement tennis court.
Great idea.
And I was like, what is that noise downstairs? And I hear one of my sons likes to grunt like Rafael Nadal. So I'm like, what is going on down in this basement? And I go
elite.
down there and they're like just thrashing this like Nerf ball in the basement against each other. Because they had the space, they created a game. And we had literally told them like 10 minutes before, they're like, can we watch Dude Perfect? And I was like, absolutely not. Go
No.
find something to do. I'm bored. Whatever. And then like 10 minutes later, they're like playing this elaborate game that's amazing.
With rules and a whole social system for enforcing dominance.
Yep, exactly.
100%.
Well, I think it's really important then, the examples you gave in the church and for family is not to spoon feed, but actually to create context,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
facilitates that. And so you set a context in which that happens. My parents were actually really good at this. I didn't realize this, again, until we were just talking. So my uncle had a cabin, a lake home. that we would visit frequently. My dad would also take us camping on lakes. I mean, lakes everywhere in Wisconsin. One of the things that they would do, they would allow me to bring a friend. And then at my uncle's cabin, he had canoes, but for some reason I didn't like the canoes. So I would use a paddle boat. Paddle boat is the most efficient form of hydro travel.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
and
that
you get your
exists.
hands free.
Yeah. And so it is like the slowest vessel ever. And I'm like 10, 12 years old, something like that. Me and my buddy just go out in the paddle boat on this huge lake. There are boats around. We would get swept by the wind, and you're like trying to paddle against the wind and weight caps, and you're like bailing out the boat as you're going along.
Awesome.
Anyway, you just get into some crazy trouble, you know, and it's just really fun.
I love it
a
too.
lot of fun.
That's when the moms are like, "Oh, do you think he's okay?" And the dad's like, "I'm sure he's fine."
I don't know where he is,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
But
They had a bell. They would ring when lunch was ready, right? And so if we didn't come back, though, nobody was worried. It's like, they must have been too far away.
They
It's not a
probably
big deal.
formed
We
a
got
camp.
towed back once. Yeah. So, but that continued on into my, you know, as I got freedom when I had my driver's license. My dad, he bought me a boat. The boat that's actually at my house right now. It's
Your
the
dad bought
same
that?
boat. He bought it for me.
it's-
It's $500.
Nice.
For that
it looks
boat.
like it costs $500.
It does. It does look like that. And anyway, so as I had a blue station wagon, a 1985 Plymouth Reliant station wagon, and I would tow that boat around with my buddies, and we'd scrape together gas money, and we were free to do whatever, you know, just go to the lakes. And
Don't you know?
but my parents really set that up. So I had a lot of buddies. Like I have friends that I still keep in contact with today that I had in high school, but I met them when I was in grade school, you know, in part because of the context that my parents had set up with like, hey, just go. Like, I don't want to see you. Leave in the morning and then come back for lunch, you know, and then we'd go out again. And they just set that up for us. It's great.
Yeah, you got to set up. Got to give them context. And it's like, oh, my neighborhood's not safe. Okay, find a place that is relatively safe, quote unquote, and get enough people that are in their age category together and just let them loose and don't give them any activity. Give them a boat or a stick or a ball or a gun or whatever it takes or several guns.
One of the other things I think is interesting is we're thinking about how to teach this friendship to our kids. I think a lot about what Paul says in the New Testament about imitation. Follow me as I'm doing these things. You can watch my life, and you can learn from and model yourself after me. One of the things I think is cool about our situation with the church is the men are actually people that my kids like to kind of hang around us. They're not with us all the time.
Yeah.
But they're able to hang around and listen to the conversations, see how we interact. Again, park days, stuff like that. They get to be a part of it. Why do you guys think it's important that we don't just say, you know, because some guys will say, oh, I have my guy friends. Like we go golfing by myself. I never include my kids in that. And I'm just trying to be away from my family as much as possible. Or it's hunting or it's something else. So compare and contrast those. Why is it important for your kids to actually be called up into that male friendship culture?
Well, part of it is that you're trying, one of the goals of parenting is to raise your kids into maturity, right? To raise them into maturity. And I'm not talking about just like, well, they'll get older and they mature like physically. But I mean like you're actually trying to train their affections. You're trying to train their values and their aims and their mission. You're trying to train their hearts to love the right things and to hate the right things. And you can't do that effectively if you're not around. Like if and they don't see that modeled, you know, between other men. So like if my boys grew up and they never saw me interact with another man and never saw another man interact with me in the context of friendship, that would be something that they would walk into life not having been matured in because they have never seen it modeled. They've never been corrected in context, just like if your boys, Eric, are in a group of men and they say something really stupid.
Yeah, which
it gives you an opportunity. It's a great opportunity for a father to say like, "Hey son, what you said was incredibly stupid. Try this instead.
Yeah.
And
Teaching.
yeah, absolutely. It's a form of mentorship, and teaching and really raising them into maturity. You can't do that if you're not around. I mean, that seems really obvious, but it is such a temptation, especially with some of the hobbies that guys have, because they are not conducive for kids. I cannot bring my children elk hunting. Not because I don't want them there, but because it is literally an impossibility. Their legs are too short. They cannot get over trees.
Yeah, they can't.
That's just the way it is. So I have to set up contexts in which they're able to participate in the things I love with my friends.
Whitetail hunting.
Yeah. Turkey hunting. I tried pheasant hunting, find out that their legs are still too short for that. So
Still too short.
yeah, I had my little boy on my shoulders while I was carrying a shotgun, and I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to shoot. Maybe from the hip. I don't know. No worries.
Give him the gun.
We did. He has a better vantage
He's on your
point.
shoulders.
Yeah.
He's holding the gun.
Yeah.
What could go wrong?
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right. We
It's
didn't
right
see
there
any
in hunter
birds, so it was
safety.
all right. Yeah.
Tree stand safety. You're the tree.
Well, no, officer, he was connected to me, so
It's
therefore
technically-
my hunter safety extends to him.
I shot it, and half of his genes are from me too.
Yeah.
This is a clear case.
So,
Yep.
So Brian, I want to ask you final thoughts as we wrap up. Keys to friendship formation as you're teaching your kids. What are you thinking about? Anything in particular, practically, that you are implementing to help them in that regard?
Yeah, the single most important one is being in the right place. Being in the right place where our mission is possible. So, like, we are in this community. We're putting our roots here. We've burned our boats. This is what we're pouring into. We have shared alignment with a lot of people around us, and we're building our life to integrate with that thing. Without that, we would be doing a lot of ad hoc sort of stuff. But because of that, it's so much more natural to do everything else we talked about. Not spoon feeding them, giving them context to have friendship, not overscheduling them, not letting them have digital alternatives that they're just like consuming their life. But really, all of that grows out of this community.
The community.
This community.
Well, don't you think it's so important too? I mean, you think about how many forces are aligned against your kids and against you and what you're trying to accomplish. How much harder it is when your church is one of those forces?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to, it's very difficult.
So I think, definitely getting that is key. Well, gentlemen, it's been a great conversation. Thankful for your friendship. Brian, as we close, I think our listeners should know, are there still vinyls available?
Yeah, right now there's maybe 90 sets of the Even Dragon Shell and Praise double vinyl. It's 2 records.
Does that record have Thunder on it? Is that part of the
Thunder?
Yeah, the song.
AC/DC?
Do you mean the song like
Yeah, Imagine
Thunder.
Dragons. Thunder.
No,
No, that's AC/DC.
Oh, you're talking about the band known as Imagine Dragons. Your
Is that not
favorite
the same
musical
thing?
act.
The lightning comes before the thunder?
They
Is that-
actually don't. It doesn't have
What
that.
about Sharks? Is Sharks on there?
Is that an Imagine Dragons song?
Oh, dude, phenomenal.
I don't know Imagine Dragons at all.
Wait, what are we talking about?
Aren't they gay Mormons?
Are they literally gay Mormons?
I just thought
You like listening to gay Mormon music.
this
This
Wow.
comes as a surprise
Hey,
to me.
but you know what?
Just hearing this for the first time.
People should ignore everything we just said, but you know what they shouldn't ignore, Eric and Dan? They should not ignore the fact that they should sign up and become patrons of the King's Hall and get access to our behind the scenes after hours show.
Because you just got a glimpse of it.
They should, because you just got
If you
a
don't
glimpse.
like it, don't sign up.
If you like all of the parts where they're like, wow, they really should have edited that out probably, then After Hours is for you. And you know what? It helps us continue to make this content and put it out free. It helps us continue to put out 90+% of everything we do absolutely free. Couldn't do it without you guys. So you know what? Check it out. Check it out. Give it a look.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, until next time, Festinolente, we will make haste slowly.